Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Rima Dael, General Manager of WSHU Radio. Thank you very much for being here, and welcome to WSHU's Join the Conversation. This is our popular lecture series where we speak to folks from all different walks of life that cover the full range of the human experience. Thank you so much this evening to our official book partner and our new community partner, Kindred Thoughts Bookstore, based in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And a special thank you also to Sacred Heart University's Discovery Science Center. They're our neighbors across the street from our station here on the campus of Sacred Heart University in Fairfield, Connecticut. They helped publicize the event this evening. Now, if you're like me, books were a godsend through the pandemic, and I have been a book nerd ever since I was a little kid, and I always lost myself in books, but I also looked for kids that looked like me in books. And it wasn't till just a couple months ago, at the age of 49, that I met my new friend, Jesse Byrd, who will be speaking with us tonight. And he's made kids who look like me possible in his books, and especially love the fact that Jesse's nonprofit and his publishing company have books that have backgrounds in the Philippines and backgrounds in Thailand. I'm originally from the Philippines and lived in Thailand for 3 years. So there's a lot that Jesse is going to share with us this evening. And of course, Jesse will be interviewed by one of our favorite reporters, WSHU reporter Desiree Diorio. So Des, the mic is yours and take it away. This is going to be a fun evening.
Well, thank you very much, Rima. I appreciate it. I'm excited to be here with Jesse and talk about his journey from college basketball player to Silicon Valley to author and publisher of diverse children's books. It's not your typical path, so I'm excited to hear about that. Not only are we going to talk about some of Jesse's fantastic books, we'll also get his recommendations for summer reading as the school year winds down. Jesse's debut novel, King Penguin, was published in 2017, and it received awards from both the Los Angeles and Paris annual book festivals. 2 picture books, Sunny Days and Real Jungle Tales, those also received awards at 4 major competitions worldwide. Jesse is also the founder of Jesse Be Creative, a publishing house of diverse children's literature. And he's got more stuff in the works that we'll learn about later. Audience members, if you want to ask Jesse a question, please use your Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And with that, welcome, Jesse. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much for having me, Desiree.
So first, let's start with your path. You were in college for basketball, then you got a gig at Google, and at some point along the line, you learned that your actual passion was children's books. Walk us through how that happened.
Yeah, I mean, I've been playing basketball pretty much my whole life, up until 22. And, you know, it was kind of something that I never really thought about, never really challenged or questioned. I was having fun with my friends, and then it became more of a business as I got into high school and college. And I remember being in college, and for any sports fans, we were playing against Kawhi Leonard's team at the time. I went to Santa Barbara, he went to San Diego State. So I remember jumping up for a rebound, and I came down and I felt my knee shift like this. And I was like, oh, what was that? Come to find out, I had a lateral meniscus tear. And this was really interesting because I had never had a surgery before. And what it gave me was a chance to step off the hamster wheel, step off of sort of just the thoughtless momentum of actions that I had been doing. Basketball was paying for my college, so it was my job. And think about what really lit me up. You know, what excited me? What did I really want to partake in, and what did I want to give? And that's when it was staring me right in the face. It's always been storytelling, and especially for young audiences.
What was your relationship with reading and books when you were a kid? When you think back on I don't know if your parents read to you or if they encouraged that. What was any particular books that you remember standing out, and what did they bring you?
Yeah, so I was lucky that both of my parents were really, really big readers. And I remember my mom going through a lot of trouble when I was younger to find diverse children's picture books, especially in the 90s, that just reflected a range of experiences. But somehow she found them, and we did 20 minutes a day of reading together, and it just built the repetition and the habit where reading wasn't a chore; it was just something to fuse into your day. And I remember my favorite children's book actually wasn't a picture book. It was a chapter book called The Phantom Toll Booth. And it was the first story that made me realize that stories can be both silly and substantive at the same time. And I knew that if I ever wanted to do this, if I ever wanted to write children's books, that I wanted it to be like that. I didn't want to tell kids what to think. I didn't want to make it a heavy-handed experience. I wanted us to explore something together and allow them to come to their own conclusions.
King Penguin, did you self-publish that through Jesse B Creative?
Yeah, so I mean, I had pretty much a typical author's journey, despite growing up in the industry, because my mom is a New York Times bestselling author. So I got to see a lot of the business mechanisms early, which also led me later on to start a company of my own to try to mend some of those things. But yeah, I mean, I submitted to a bunch of agents, a bunch of publishers, and either crickets or rejections around. I have a big file of rejections, well over 200. And then I just kind of got the feeling that, well, if this story only serves a handful of kids, I still think it's worth it to put it out into the universe, and we'll just see what it does. I had already spent a year and a half, 2 years writing it. I was just sort of ready to let it have whatever impact it was meant to. And went through one round of crowdfunding, which didn't work out the first time, and then went through a second round, which did, and was able to self-publish the book. And that same book that was turned down by a ton of publishers ended up winning some awards. And then from there, I was like, well, maybe I can do this, and then maybe I can create space for others along the way.
What did you learn about the publishing industry? Agents, publishers, other authors, what did you learn about that whole industry while you were shopping King Penguin and before you ended up founding Jesse B Creative?
I think what I learned the most, Desiree, is how few seats at the table there are for marginalized creators, those from diverse communities. It really is a whole bunch of people trying to fit into a very small percentage of seats. And of course, that means that a lot of good work doesn't make it, not because it isn't good, but because maybe they've already signed 2 Black books for this quarter, or they've already signed 6 Black books for this year, which means that all of this amazing work kind of gets left by the wayside if it doesn't have a home, if it doesn't have a place to land, then it just keeps circling. And I knew that this was systemic. I knew it was the cause of a few different things. And I didn't want to wait around for the solution to appear. I wanted to kind of be a part of the change. I wanted to try to help with everything that I had known up to that point, which wasn't much, but I knew that growing up in the industry, I did know some things thanks to my mom. And I tried to apply the discipline that both she and my dad have instilled in me, and just tried to make space. So I knew that I just didn't want a career for myself. That felt kind of selfish, to grow up in the industry and then to write something and then have a solo career is okay. But what's better than that is creating ecosystems of opportunity where you can have these breeding grounds of ideas and thought and access. And that's really what I was excited about.
It's interesting. I don't have kids. I'm the fun auntie who, blows in with any number of fun things to do with my nieces and nephews. But during the pandemic, I had a standing weekly date to read to my nieces and nephews, and I would read them a storybook. And I noticed that we are seeing more diverse characters in children's books, but that doesn't necessarily equate to actual more diversity among the authors and editors and publishers. Can you talk a little bit about that disparity?
Yeah, there was a very alarming stat that kind of kicked me into high gear personally when I think I saw it in 2018 when they were talking about, the CBCC does a statistic every year of diversity. They do an audit of diversity amongst children's books. And in the fine print was the fact that although, 10% of all children's books published that year featured or centered Black characters or families, less than 50% of those books, of that 10%, were written or illustrated by Black people. And with, with our history in America, with misrepresentation, with minstrel shows, with all of these different things, it's very dangerous for those outside of the experience to speak for the Black experience. So there was one aspect of representation and accurate and quality depictions of Black people, Black families, Black experiences, but also on top of that, those are opportunities, paid opportunities for Black authors and illustrators where they can't even write about their own experience because someone outside of it is getting paid to tell the Black story.
When it's not even their story to tell.
When it's not their story. And when statistically, if you are a part of the larger, more centered group, then you have plenty of shots, percentage-wise, plenty more shots than someone from a marginalized community. And so that was very alarming. And that was also like, what are the kids reading and from whom? If it's not lived experience, then who is it coming from? And what are they basing their perceptions off of, or what it feels like to be in this skin? And that was something that was very, very alarming. And that really inspired me to want to widen the work that I was doing at the time.
I want to jump into two of the books. Two of the books that I have here are Seeking Shanti and Sunny Days. Both of these books have to do with natural disasters. And when I learned that you lived in both California and Louisiana, I assume this means that you have a lot of experience with natural disasters as a kid, potentially. Is that what was going on there? Or can you talk a little bit about the character development for both Martine from Sunny Days and Kavya from Seeking Shanti?
You're absolutely right. Growing up in California and New Orleans, one of my first memories was the '89 earthquake in California. I remember hiding under a desk at Snow White Preschool in Oakland near Piedmont. And that was actually one of my first memories. And then, most of my family still lives in New Orleans proper. And, when Katrina hit, hearing the stories and being so connected to those stories, it really was an inspiration to kind of talk about it. I'm a firm believer that just because some of us in the publishing realm feel like some stories aren't necessarily fit for children, or we haven't quite found the way to tell them, it doesn't mean kids aren't living those harsh realities. It doesn't mean that they're not experiencing displacement or hunger or poverty or anything else just because we haven't found the adequate narrative vehicles to make them feel seen, to help them feel not alone. And so I knew with the first story, that was honestly to date, that was the fastest story I've ever written end to end, was Sunny Days, because I just felt so close to it. And I felt like I knew the community, I knew the characters. The lead character was based off my goddaughter, who was about that age at the time, my goddaughter Angel. And it just felt really personal and it felt really intimate. And if we were going to tell this story and relate it, I wanted it to be from some voices that were near to it. And so that's Sunny Days. When it comes to Seeking Shanti, I was a support writer on that one. Sandy did an amazing job leading the writing for that book, and Monica did an amazing job on the illustrations. And it centers a family in India who's displaced because of a flood, and they end up going to the refugee camp, coming back to see their home devastated and have to make the tough decision that so many families do, that my family did in New Orleans as well, which is, do you rebuild or do you move on? And it's such a layered and complex and individualistic decision, but it is one that a lot of families face due to climate change and due to natural disasters. And so these were just issues that not only myself, but the folks that I'm lucky enough to work with, we really wanted to speak to, we wanted to bring light to, and we wanted to actually try to help. So with Seeking Shanti, a percentage of all book sales go to providing eco-sustainable homes to families in India and Africa who have been displaced due to climate change. So these homes, they $365 for one home. They last up to 10 years and they house a family of 5. And so this is the type of impact picture books, impact stories that I'm just getting more and more interested in working on. And I'm so happy that Emma and Ramya brought me into this project and I was able to tag team.
We're gonna cut here to a question from the audience, which ties into one of the questions I also wanted to ask you. Who are the authors that inspire you now in children's literature? And in addition to that, what are you looking for in a pitch for a children's book?
Yeah, I'll give you two of the authors, and there are many, but I will give you two of the authors that really inspire me right now. Jacqueline Woodson, which is no surprise, she's no secret. Brown Girl Dreaming is an amazing body of work, and it's getting everything it deserves. It's absolutely awesome. Kwame Alexander as well is somebody that I admire in the space, and of course Jason Reynolds is just phenomenal. His honesty, his authenticity, his fearlessness in his writing is really a bar to strive for and to continue to strive for. And so those are just three quick names off the top of my head of people who, if they put something out, I'm not only going to read it, but I'm going to study it and see what I can learn as a student of the craft. Go ahead.
No, I didn't want to cut you off.
Oh, no.
My question was going to be, how would you describe your own personal approach to storytelling when it comes to little kids and these big issues?
Yeah, so honestly, I'm a big fan of humor when appropriate. I think humor is such a great vehicle to sort of get past defenses, get past preconceived notions, and open people up, and get the sort of information and messaging in, without all of the tenseness. And so I'm a big fan of humor when appropriate, and I definitely, my goal is to always leave a gap for original thought, leave a gap for interpretation. And sometimes that's scary. And I think it's scary for a lot of us as authors. And it can cause us to over-explain sometimes. It can cause us to over-storytell sometimes because we don't want to be misunderstood, or we don't want people to take it the wrong way, or we don't want them to land at the wrong conclusions. But, part of this is a dance. It's not necessarily a co-authorship, but we're doing this together. So I have to trust that once I've taken the story so far, it's really the reader's journey from there. And they can take from it what they want, and they can learn from it what they want. But it does require a level of trust. And so that's really my goal, is to never chew the food for them, because at that point, I haven't left enough space for critical thinking. And it's a very fine line, especially in a picture book. You're talking about 500 to 750 words, maybe up to 1,000, maybe a little bit more if it's nonfiction. But you don't have a lot of real estate to get these stories across. And so it becomes a test of efficiency. And sometimes you get it right, and sometimes you learn.
Fair enough. When I think about the children's books that were read to me when I was a kid, or once I was in that young adult category, I think about those books. I think about things like Babysitter's Club and the Hardy Boys, and there was a girl, Ramona Quimby, who was always getting into whatever. And even when I was younger, there was Curious George. You had these recurring characters that took us through life. I am hard pressed as we sit here right now to think of a character of color or a family of color. And I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I am hard pressed to think of one at this moment as a reoccurring family or main character who experiences life. Have you thought about taking Martine or Kavya or any of your characters and creating a series, a children's book series out of any of them?
Absolutely. You touched on something that really honestly just dawned on me about 3 years ago in terms of recurring characters from marginalized communities within children's picture books. You're right. We have Madeleines, we have Cliffords, we have a lot of characters that are different and other, but we don't necessarily have a lot of Black series. We don't have a lot of Asian series, and so on and so forth. Most of the books I create are built as series. They are built with the intention and the rollout, and they have book 2 and 3 and 4 summaries and overviews and expansions, and sometimes even adaptations into TV and film. But I think one of the biggest dangers of not being able to have a series is that you can't show the spectrum of life for those diverse characters. Anytime you only get one shot to tell a story, it's like, that's not really how life goes. You want to see them in happy moments and sad moments. You want to see them maybe trying to do a school play, maybe trying to learn how to ride a bike. And the more spectrum you get, I believe the more humanity you can inject, because people can see themselves in those slices of life. But and I think that's one of the true dangers of not having diverse series, is that we don't get to see diverse characters in multiple situations, multiple scenarios that are just a part of the human experience. And so, yes, absolutely. Even with the authors and illustrators I'm lucky enough to work with, most of them have built their franchises to make sure that the characters can carry on and continue beyond book 1.
we've seen books take center stage in some political debates at the moment. Where do you stand, where do you stand on some states and some legislatures and some school districts choosing to ban books that center the lived experiences of diverse families, whether that's LGBTQ or other minority groups? Where do you stand on that?
I firmly believe that storytelling in its highest and truest form is a public service. And whenever I see books being banned, it only speaks more to the importance of these vehicles. It lets me know that the folks banning it understand how important of a vehicle stories are for humanizing, for empathizing, for understanding and learning. And they're afraid of those books. They're terrified because if those books pose no threat, there would be no need to ban them. But they do pose a threat because they can expand minds. They can make something that you are trying to turn into a two-dimensional thing into a three-dimensional thing. And once somebody can connect and care about the experience of another, it's going to be really, really hard to make it seem like that person is a monster, like the other is only dangerous. And so whenever I hear about books being banned, it just reaffirms the importance of books, and it reaffirms the importance of a diverse spectrum of stories, because what you're doing to me is you're affirming the power of stories, and you're affirming how it is a threat to the folks who don't want folks to see other walks of life and other perspectives. So it really cranks up the heat for me. It makes me want to do more.
Yeah. Fair. Can you take us inside Jesse Be Creative for a second and talk about the kinds of resources that are there? Maybe there's a storyteller who thinks they've got a great idea for a book, but maybe they went through the same path as you. They're getting shot down, I think you said 150 times, and feeling like, dejected. Talk about Jesse Be Creative and how Jesse Be Creative can help.
So what we're really excited about doing is, again, creating these ecosystems where authors can have access to editing, to peer reviews. They can also understand what the most traditionally efficient steps are for getting something from concept to creation and then into the hands of an agent or a publisher. And then if that doesn't work out, what your next steps are. What I've really found is there's no shortage of amazing storytellers excited to tell their story and committed to the process of getting better and investing in themselves and doing everything within their power to see this thing blossom. What typically demotivates and really pulls the air out of the tire is when they don't know what to do with their energy, where they're like, I'm so excited, but I don't know what to do next. I've written this draft, and what do I do? Do I just talk to an agent? Do I call them? Should I have it edited? And if so, how much does that cost? Do I need an editor? Well, how much, or illustrator? How much do illustrators cost? And there's just a sort of bevy of questions. And so we try to answer those questions for artists entering. We try to level set, of course, the honesty of what the stats say around being picked up. I mean, I was just listening to a video by Coca-Cola, which is an amazing imprint under Penguin, and they put out fantastic books. And they were basically saying that they own that particular year, they had only picked up 1% of unpublished authors and illustrators for new projects. So imagine how many folks had submitted and how many folks actually get acquired, actually get a deal. And often those first time deals for children's picture books typically aren't going to be a windfall of money unless you're a celebrity or a public figure. And so all of this is just information. And with that information, you literally see people perk up. They get excited. They know that there's work ahead of them. They know there's an uncertain journey, but now at least they got a map, and at least they have a community of other people who are walking that path with them to ask questions to. People are sharing links to different awards. We have a free meetup group called Creating Children's Books, if anybody wants to check that out. And you can join, where we do workshops, where we have editors and agents come in and talk about the business, and we share opportunities for awards. It's just really about creating community. I think that's one of the biggest missing things. When I moved back from Dubai to California in 2019, I just knew the Bay Area was going to have some vibrant children's book communities for peer review and all of this other stuff. You can find it for mystery, you can find it for adult fiction. I was unsuccessful in finding it for children's books. And that's when, you know, I just really wanted to create that space. And we have like about almost 600 members now. And
Wow.
It's been a tremendous help. A lot of the folks from that community are now getting publishing deals, quite a few of them. And so it's been great to just have friends and to have people to bounce ideas off of, you know? And so that to me is the most essential value that we provide to authors and illustrators is just helping them figure out where to place their energy and find their way.
I want to talk a bit about the relationship between author and illustrator. I have here Sunny Days. I hope everyone can see it. Oh no, you can't really see it. Okay. Well, there's a really great illustration of Jesse in the back, and I'm not sure if it's going to work.
Yep.
No, oh, there he is.
Hey.
There he is. That looks creepy, so I'm not going to do that anymore. But it's a really great illustration of Jesse playing a video game and surrounded by things he loves, like his wife and French toast and warm popcorn. The images in Sunny Days are so they're so vibrant, and you're immediately immersed in Martine's world there, which I believe is New Orleans. What is that relationship like? Do you describe, because obviously the text doesn't contain much description like you would see in an adult book about like location and setting and things like that. How closely do you work with the illustrator when you're trying to bring this vision to life?
It's quite a close and intimate relationship. And honestly, this process was inspired by the time I spent at Google, where, you know, we were learning a lot about spreadsheets and just how to organize information. And so what we do for every single children's picture book is we do something called a story grid. And it's literally a spreadsheet that lays out scene 1 on this row. Here's the location. Here are the characters in that scene. Here's the dialogue for that scene. Here's the action that they're doing. Are they running, skipping, jumping, swimming? Here's the mood for that scene, which is super important. Is it a happy scene? Is it a sad scene? Is it curious? Is it exciting? Because that's going to help the illustrator dictate how to use the colors, what POV or angle to use. Is it a bottom up angle? Is it a top down angle? And any special notes. So for each scene, it's sort of the story creator's job to go in and fill out this story grid for the illustrator, just to make sure that they understand exactly how each of the scenes can flow. And it's not a necessary part of creating children's books. Everybody has their own process, but for us, what it does is it takes some of the guesswork out. And you'd be surprised with a lot of illustrators. They don't want you to overreach, but they do want to know what their sandbox is. And within that sandbox, then they can be creatively free because they know that the client knows what they want. A lot of illustrators get frustrated because they're helping the client figure out what they want. And to be honest, in most cases, if the illustrator is also helping you figure out what you want, fundamentally, it's going to cost you more money because they're spending more time doing the groundwork, the architecture, the blueprinting that some illustrators feel like should have been brought to them whole. And so it's in traditional publishing. Typically, if I were to write a script and I hand it over to a major publisher, then mostly I'm outside of the developmental process as an author until I have some intervals and checkpoints, but until it's basically done. And for me, I think some of the best ideas come when the story writer, the story creator, and the illustrator get to be in tandem together throughout the process, because they get to scat just like jazz. Maybe the illustrator comes up with a new drawing that inspires the author to change some text on that page, or vice versa. And I think you get the most organic blossoming of a story from end to end. The reason that's typically hard with major publishers is because it's more of a slow burn, slow cook process. It's more of a Pixar process. It's going to be hard to crank out 100 titles with that process. But what I think you do get is a higher level of intimacy and a higher level of authenticity and organic development throughout. And so that's our process in-house. We're not necessarily looking to pump out 150 books a year. We want books that are from own voices, authentic voices, beautifully illustrated, beautifully and professionally written, and that can hopefully stand the test of time.
I want to jump to an audience member question now. How does showing the spectrum of kids in diverse situation, how does that help increase both literacy and understanding the world around you?
Yeah, it seems kind of self-evident to us as adults now, but kids really get excited to see themselves reflected in the things that they participate in, whether that's a video game, whether that's a TV show, or whether it's a book. So when a kid can see some of themselves in the story and some of their culture, some of their community, some of their lived experience, often they're more hyped to lean in. And what it does for the kids that aren't a part of that experience is it gives them a wider perspective, and it expands their POV on maybe what some of their classmates might be going through, or what people that they never even know might be going through. Like I said, stories are huge potential vehicles for empathy and understanding and compassion, because they can humanize. And I think that that's super important. And so when you think about diverse representation, you are thinking about literacy rates as well, because kids want to read what they're excited to read. Point blank period. I read a lot of Goosebumps as a kid. Like, I don't know if it was telling me anything factual about the world, you know what I mean? But it wasn't the only thing I read, but it was building my relationship and my mechanisms for reading. The same way you wouldn't only eat dessert, but I mean, sometimes that may be what's exciting. And so I think it's important. I think it's really important.
Audience members, again, if you have a question for Jesse, please stick it in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. We appreciate your questions. Okay, the moment that teachers and parents and grandparents and anybody else who deals with kids has been waiting for, Jesse, your summer reading recommendations. Break it down.
All right, so I got a summer 5 for you all, and these I made sure that on this particular list, because I knew we were going to be able to talk about some of the stories that I had a chance to work with, but these stories have nothing to do with me. These are just things that I am a fan of. I'm lucky enough to be able to.
Self-promotion is fine. That's fine too.
Oh no, it's fine. I'll share some. I'll share that in a separate list. But I'm lucky enough to be able to study a lot of children's picture books as a part of just sort of learning and trying to understand how to better tell stories for kids. The first story that I recommend is called Another by Christian Robinson. He is one of my favorite illustrators. And in this particular story, the illustrations are so playful and distinct. There's no words in the picture book. It's just illustrations, which often is kind of hard to really connect with a wordless picture book for me. But he's done this so fantastically, and the characters look so iconic. I'm a huge fan of anything he does, but Another by Christian Robinson is the very first book that I would recommend checking out. He's a phenomenal storyteller. Number 2 is Just a Minute by Juji Morales. It's a humorous folktale about a grandma who's staving off her transition to the afterlife by telling death that she just needs to finish up one more thing before death takes her away. And it reminds me of classic tales like 1001 Arabian Nights, where you have a character trying to avoid a fate they rather not face by coming up with these mechanisms of delay. And it's clever and it's fun. It's also a counting book. You know, the grandma does one thing and then 2 things and then 3 things and then 4 things. They have Spanish and English words. And overall, I'm just a huge fan of Juji's art. And this is a tale that I read a while back and it still holds up for me. So Just a Minute by Juji Morales is a book that I would highly recommend. Number 3, Change Sings by Amanda Gorman and Lauren Long. This is a superstar combination of individuals. Amanda Gorman, as you all remember, was the inaugural poet who really just lit up the stage in 21. Lauren Long is a fantastic illustrator. Is a fantastic illustrator who has won multiple awards and just creates with so much space and light and color and emotion. And they used a stained glass aesthetic on the cover, which I think really alludes to the reverence and sanctity of the themes inside the book. It's a story that feels both hopeful and honest. And so I highly recommend Change Sings by Amanda Gorman and Lauren Long. Number 4 of 5 is Look Up by Nathan Bryan and Dapo Adiola. Dapo is one of my favorite illustrators. He really does amazing work. And in this story, Nathan pens a fantastic script about a young girl who's fascinated by stars and space. And she has, the book has excellent suspense. It's one of my favorite parts of the book, is that it really builds, and the emotional peaks and valleys keep you so invested about what's going to happen. And is it going to work out for the main character? Or is it not? And she really pops off the page, the lead, and she really pops. She has magnetism, she has electricity, and it's a fantastic story. And last but not least is The Magical Yet by Angela DiTerlizzi and Lorena Alvarez. Fantastic book about hope. It's a book about what's possible. You immediately get dropped into the character's plight, everything that they're struggling with. They're sort of pouting. They're trying to learn how to ride a bike. It's not working out. And then they get introduced to the possibility of how you have the potential and capacity to improve, to have growth in something, even if you're not going to be perfect or, top of the line at it. And I absolutely love that message of growth over perfection. And I think this book does it really well. And so those are the 5 books that I would recommend for summer reading.
Great picks. A lot of the things you're talking about there, growth, self-exploration, dealing with the death of a loved one and what that process is like. A lot of those things are universal. And I would argue now for this generation of children now, dealing with natural disasters, going back to Sunny Days and Seeking Shanti, those are also, unfortunately, universal issues that kids have to deal with. Do you see a role for the pandemic and things like social justice issues, like the protests after George Floyd was murdered? Do you see those kinds of things also becoming a subject of children's books?
I absolutely see those things becoming a subject of children's books. I mean, the larger themes and the larger systemic spotlights that allow them to come to be. I can definitely see that becoming a part of it. I think our challenge on the publishing side is that publishing timelines are typically pretty extended. If you were to finish a book today, Desiree, and the publisher liked it and they accepted it, it may not hit the shelf for 12 to 18 to 24 months. What that does to really time-sensitive things or things that are really hot topics right now is it means that by the time the book comes out, maybe the social consciousness, the social attention has shifted to another issue. Maybe those issues are still important, but they're not the top thing people are focusing on. There's so many things that are worthy of attention in the world. And so I think our challenge as publishers is not only to find a way to relay some of the things that are happening in the world to young audiences, but to also making sure that we're getting them this content in the time-sensitive way, that by the time it gets to them, it's not stale, or that people haven't moved on. Stale in the sense of it was at the top of everybody's consciousness at one point when everybody was talking about it. Now maybe they're talking about gas prices or climate change or war abroad, and all of those things are worthy to talk about. But you want to make sure that you're talking about things in a timely fashion so that you can reach the most minds and touch the most hearts. I think timing does matter. And I think we have to get better about timing in publishing. We're too slow.
Yeah, for people who don't understand that, why is there that 12 or 18 month delay?
So largely it's for very understandable reasons. Like if you were to finish your book, publishers want to make sure that they're getting it into the right sales pipeline. They're pre-selling it. They're making sure that it gets reviews from places like Kirkus or School Library Journal. They're, for example, the New York Times Children's Book Review wants to see your book 6 months, sometimes 4 to 6 months before it's published. And then they want to see it again right before it's published. So that means that, you need at least a 6-month lead time to even be considered by them for a review. So there's all of these business mechanisms sometimes that can delay the process. And then also with a publisher, there are all of these other books in a line ready to go out as well. So just because you finish yours, now you got to get in the queue and everything else already has a pub date. So you have to get in line and wait for yours. And so those are 2 of the biggest reasons why books can take a while. It's largely ginning up sales and excitement and press and PR. And then the other is just that there are other books that have already been waiting to go out that were finished a year, 6 months, 2 years before yours. And,
gotcha. There's no breaking news in book publishing.
Yeah. It's so tough. There are some publishers that are now challenging that status quo. And I think that's a good thing because we'll all learn. We'll all learn how to get books out in a more timely fashion so we can speak to issues that are happening now-ish.
I want to jump over to a couple of audience member questions. Stephanie wants to know, can we find your story grid on your website?
You can. I do have the story grid for free download on jessebcreative.com, JESSEB as in boy, creative.com. You can find it there and you can use it as you please. There's even a link if you want some help. There's a link where you can book a consult and we can talk through maybe how to organize or architect or do some story coaching. And so, yeah, you can find it there.
And also, just so the audience knows, the 5 books that Jesse was describing on his top 5 for summer reading, those are all in the audience chat. Mary wants to know if King Penguin will become a picture book.
It might. I would love that sort of challenge. The thing that I'm learning as I go along is that every story kind of needs a different amount of breathing room. So King Penguin was like a 250-page novel, right? And so
Yeah.
it would be an awesome challenge to put that into a children's picture book. What I would really love to do with King Penguin is turn it into a graphic novel. I think with illustrations and with a bit more real estate, we can have a lot of fun with that story. The same way Dreamcatcher, one of our picture books, its next adaptation will be a graphic novel, because what we learned throughout that process was it was really kind of hard to explain and share this really big universe of Dreamcatcher inside of 32 pages. We just needed more room. And so we're gonna try to do that next. So a lot of this is R&D and just having the pathway and the runway to be able to try something and figure out what works, and not necessarily have to go away or quit if one thing doesn't work out, because that's not really how it works.
Yeah. Jesse, what are you working on now? What can we expect from you in the upcoming year?
Yeah, there are quite a few projects I'm really excited to share with folks. One is called Mighty Mara. The lead writer on that is an artist, a musician, a dancer, and her name is Karina Ho. And she's a differently abled musician dancer. She uses wheelchair. And it is the story of a little girl who wants to dance in her school talent show. But because she uses a wheelchair, a lot of people in her community don't necessarily believe that that's a talent or ability that she can have. And she is going on her personal journey to show them otherwise. And so really lucky to be working with Karina. She's fantastic and an amazing talent. And so Mighty Mara is one book that we're excited that'll come out spring of next year. And we're excited about that one. And this, what you see behind me, is something I'm super interested in. It's a book that we acquired from an author illustrator named Rev Valdez. And what he is excited about doing is creating books around Filipino mythology for young readers. And his lead character, Bunso, is hilarious and funny and charming and precocious. And he's a great lead. And you talk about series, like this character, I believe, has a ton of legs. And Rev has just working on his stories and sort of being a part of it has already taught me so much about Filipino mythology. And growing up, all I was really exposed to was Greek myth. And then I got a little bit older and I was able to access some African myth, but I knew absolutely nothing about Filipino myth. And it's just been so phenomenal to go on this learning curve. So it'll be a series of books. This book is called Bunso Meets Amumu, and it's the first one in the series. And it'll always be Bunso meets another mythological monster and has this sort of experience with him. And
that's great. That is the series.
That's the series. Yeah. That's the series.
Awesome.
So yeah, those are just a handful of projects that I'm really excited to be working on.
Well, this has been really, really illuminating, and taking us inside Jesse Be Creative has been super interesting. And just hearing about the creative process and how this all works and comes together to put together a story has been super interesting. And I appreciate you giving us the time.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
I think that wraps up our Q&A. And I think I am going to ask Rima or Janice to hop back in.
I'm back. Thank you so much, Jesse. That was absolutely fascinating. Thank you, everybody, for attending tonight. We will send out an email in the next day or so with a lot of the links and the wonderful titles that Jesse has shared with us. Hopefully that'll lead to more conversations and maybe some more wonderful books out there as well. WSHU is always, adding more events and conversations and podcasts and other things to what we offer our community. So keep checking our website from time to time to see what we're up to. We're at WSHU.org. And again, special thanks to Kindred Thoughts Bookstore for really sponsoring this event and being our official book partner. So again, thank you all so very, very much, and keep reading and have a great night.
Thanks, Jesse.
Thank you. Thank you both.